Hey now, Brawlers, it's time for another Board Game Brawl review with Nick Minahan, sponsored by BoardGameBliss.com. Today we're going to take a look at Homeland, the game from Gale Force 9. Now, as a little interesting side note, I thought it was cool that, or I don't know if it's cool, but it's just interesting that Gale Force 9 is really setting themselves up as a company similar to Cryptozoic Entertainment, wherein they focus mainly on licensed properties. Cryptozoic has things like DC Comics and Lord of the Rings and, what's another one? Assassin's Creed, those types of properties under their belt for all their different deck builders and lighter games. But Gale Force 9 is really focused on TV shows, critically acclaimed ones, and also the games themselves seem to be more gamerly games, or a little bit on the heavier side, even if they're not that heavy. So you have Firefly, which is a pick up and deliver game, Sons of Anarchy, which I haven't played, but apparently is a worker placement game, and now you have Homeland, which is their version of a, let's say, trader semi-co-op game, but it's a little more complicated than that. Also, they have a Family Guy game planned, which I'm guessing is going to be a total train wreck, but I'm hopeful that it's not. If you're not familiar with Homeland, it's a show about a bunch of CIA analysts, specifically the main character is named Carrie, played by Claire Danes, and the other main character is Sergeant Brody, who's a returning war hero. He was a POW, and I don't want to say too much in case you actually want to go out and watch the show after this, but Brody comes back, and Claire Danes is this CIA analyst who is like really mentally unstable, like legitimately mentally unstable. But she's brilliant. She's like the best analyst they ever had at the CIA. And Brody comes back, and this is in the middle of all these terrorist threats against the U.S., and Claire Danes, Carrie, really suspects that Brody might have turned, that he may be a double agent working for a specific terrorist group led by Abu Nazir, I believe is the character's name. And then it's just this cat and mouse of, is he really a terrorist? Is Claire Danes really going to be able to catch him? And so on. That is the entire first season. And I won't say much more than that. Now, I stuck with the show through the second season all the way to the end. And then I kind of bailed. It's not that I think that the show was bad, but it did get really silly. I can't really say too much, but there's a character that should have died in the first season, and people who have watched the show know what I mean. And unfortunately, it's a very popular character, and Showtime basically told, I think this was urban legend, but I think it's actually been confirmed to be true. Showtime essentially told the showrunners, this character's too popular, and the show will just collapse if you kill them. The audience is not going to like it, so you can't kill this person. That's just it. You just have to work with this person and keep moving forward. And I think that was to the detriment of the show. They should have gone the Game of Thrones route where no one is safe, and that didn't happen. And the plots just got sillier and sillier and sillier as this character continued to be involved. I know, it sounds very obtuse. I'm talking around mentioning a major spoiler, but in any event, that's my history with the show. I will probably continue to watch it at some point, but it's at the end of a long list of a backlog of shows I have to get to. But still, I liked it for what it was. It was really interesting. And so I was very curious of what a Homeland board game would be like. And I mentioned before, I kind of alluded to the fact that it was sort of a trader co-op game, but not really. This is a competitive game. In this game, you're either going to be a loyal agent of the CIA, or a political opportunist, and it's a little nebulous what that means within the confines of the story, but maybe you're a higher ranking agent in the CIA and you're trying to make a play for power as a politician instead, or maybe you're a politician with ties to the CIA, something like that. Or you're a terrorist mole. There's a possibility that there'll be one terrorist mole in the group. Now, you have games like Shadows over Camelot or Battlestar Galactica where nominally everyone is working together towards a common goal, and there's just one player who has gone rogue. But if you can take care of that player who's potentially a traitor, no problem. Everyone else is going to win. Well, this is a competitive game. In other words, no matter what happens, there's only going to be one winner. But there may be many losers, or, it's kind of tough to explain. Why don't I just go ahead and show you how the game is played? Then we're going to come back. I'll let you know what I think. Okay, I'm going to try to race through an overview of Homeland, the game from Gale Force 9. This is a competitive game for 3 to 6 players. The goal of the game is, well, your goal actually changes a bit. You want to be the player with the most victory points at the end. That's pretty obvious, but how you go about doing that depends on what role that you have. At the beginning of the game, each player is going to be given an agenda card. These agenda cards will tell you whether or not you're a loyal agent of the agency, the CIA, a political opportunist who's only out for your own political gain, or if you're the terrorist mole. Now, how this is going to work is that depending on the number of players, a certain number of these roles are going to be in play. There's always potentially one terrorist mole in play, but there may only be 1 or 2 political opportunists in play, or there may be 2 or 3 loyal agents. And also, you're going to take a number of agenda cards equal to the number of players plus 1, which means that when you shuffle everything up, there's a chance that there will only be less than the maximum amount of loyal agents, 1 or 2 political opportunists, and in the lower numbers of games, no political opportunists, and there may not be a terrorist mole at all. Now, on these cards, it details the different things that you get victory points for. The loyal agent gets a victory point at the end of the game for every one of these rep tokens that they manage to hold on to, in addition to asset cards, which I'll explain in a bit, but asset cards are characters that are also going to be worth victory points if you have them at the end. Political opportunists get 1 for every political clout token that they have at the end of the game, plus their assets. The terrorists is a bit different. During the course of the game, you have these 2 tracks on either end of the game board. The terrorist track and the agency track. The game is going to end when one of those tracks fills up completely with tokens of the appropriate type. So you have the agency tokens here, and you have the terrorist tokens there. If either one of those tracks fills up completely, the game is going to end immediately. Now, if that terror track fills up completely, not only does the game end, but the terrorist automatically wins. There's nothing that any of the other players can do about it. Terrorist wins. If the agency track fills up, that's when you go to the point counting to see who wins. And in that case, the terrorist mole still has a chance to win because he or she is going to get 2 victory points for every one of those terror tracks, the terror track tokens that's on over there, plus the victory points for assets. However, during the end phase, each player has a chance to accuse one of the other players at the table of being the terrorist mole. So at the start of the game, in addition to the asset cards, everyone's going to be handed these case lead cards, which have a couple of other uses in the game as well. But during the end phase, if it gets down to scoring points, everyone's going to take a case lead card matching the color of the player that they suspect is the terrorist, place it face down, then everyone reveals all at once. Now, you don't have to accuse anyone at all. But if you successfully accuse someone of being the mole, then you get 6 bonus victory points. If you accuse the wrong person of being the mole, you lose 3 victory points. But if even one person successfully accuses the actual terrorist mole, and remember, there may not even be a terrorist in the game, the terrorist automatically loses. Their points do not count at all. Okay? I know that was quite a mouthful, but that is the end game situation. That will it'll help you a little bit as we go through the description of how to play the game. Now, like I said, everyone's going to get a bunch of these case lead cards, and they're all the same, but you'll have a bunch of them in your color. One of them is going to go into a stack that is randomized, and this is going to determine turn order. At the start of every round, you'll have these. You'll take one of them, flip them over. Then when we get to player turns after the terrorist turn, I'll explain that in a second, that player is going to go first, then you go clockwise around the table. Next turn, or the next start of the next round, you do the same thing. When you go through the entire stack of cards, if the game hasn't ended yet, you reshuffle and do it all over again. So in this way, there's a erratic, variable turn order that's going to be changing all the time. So the first thing you do in the round is the terrorist turn, and how this works, whoever's card was drawn first is going to get this terrorist token to signify that they're the first player, and then you're going to move you're going to analyze imminent threats. Well, the first round you're going to skip a couple of these things, but if any of the terrorist threats get up to the imminent threat level on the terror board here, the terror board, then you have to immediately resolve them. I think we'll just get back to that in a second. Then you would also advance any threats that are already there, but most of the time, including for the first round of the game, the main thing that you're going to do is the fourth step, which is actually revealing new threats. A threat consists of a plot card on top or on the bottom of an organization card that is flipped over like this, with an intel card on top of it. So what are each of these things? The plot cards are the negative plans that the terrorists are plotting to kill the people of the United States with, and you're trying to prevent that unless you're the terrorist. Let's take a look at a couple of the plot cards and get the breakdown of them. Okay, so first thing we have is the complexity of the scheme. The complexity is going to add to how tough it is for the agency to overcome this task. I'll get back to that in a second. Global fallout. All players must burn an asset. There's either global fallout or regular fallout. Global fallout affects all players if this pops for the terrorists. Fallout only affects whoever is the case lead for that, which I'll get to in a second. And this one is all players must burn an asset. The impact, which you're actually going to know ahead of time before this plot is revealed, is 3. That means that many, if this goes to either side, the terrorists or the agency, that many tokens get added to the track. To show you another plot, here's a regular Fallout card. This only affects the case lead. The case lead must discard all undeployed soldiers, complexity 7, and impact of 2. Now, the plot card is going to go face down on the board, and on top of that, you're going to have an organization card. And the organization card, you'll know right away, that's going to be flipped up, and it's put on top of the card like this to form it like it's kind of weird how you stack the cards in this game. So you'll know what the impact is of the plot, but not necessarily what the plot is itself. So here's an example of an organization card. Religious extremists. Has 3 sophistication. This number is going to get added to whatever the complexity is, which you're not sure of at first, on the other side of the card. And that number is what the agency has to surpass in blue points in order to have it pop for the agency instead. Also, if you successfully complete the mission for the agency, you gain this advantage, which in this case is drawing an asset card. Just to show you another one, here is Abu Nazir's card, who's an important character in the show. He's like the main villain of the first season. Advantage, take 3 reputation tokens if this one succeeds, 4 sophistication. And also over here, on the side of the card, this tells you where these are going to start on the board. So when they come out, you look at what this says and they go into that level: low, guarded, elevated, severe, and imminent. So you'll fill up the board with a number of these equal to the number of players. And there is one last thing I need to show you on here. So this will start on guarded. Let's just say this is 3 players just to expedite it. So now the intel card. The intel cards are the show the sort of the random effects. These are random, but you'll be able to have a chance to play these intel cards as well. But these are the agency and the terrorists pushing back and forth, trying to make the plot succeed, and also some random events that are beyond your control. So in the deck, you're going to find these red cards with numbers that I think are from 1 to 5. That these are going to add to the total when it gets to imminent, trying to push it over towards red. And then you have blue ones that push it over towards the agency side. Now on the bottom of these cards, you'll often have tokens depicted. On a player's turn, I'll explain this in a second, but one of the actions is to discard one of these cards in order to get that many tokens. But you have to be careful which cards you discard, because people are always on the lookout to see if you're the terrorist or not. So if they see you discarding high blue cards like 3, 4, and 5, they might be like, well, you might say, oh, well, I just really want the token. But they're like, well, why didn't you discard a red one? Well, I don't have a red one. No, sure you don't in your hand of cards. Each player also is going to start off with a few intel cards as well, 3 of them. Then you have these random event cards, which if these are in the stack of cards when you're resolving or analyzing the threat during the imminent, they're going to happen at that time. So this one says, the case lead has to pay 2 political clout or burn an asset. Burning an asset means killing one of your characters that you have. And this one is actually good for the agency. It says the threat is neutralized. That means that blue immediately gets it and gets all the good stuff. So that's how the first turn of the first round would go. You don't have any threats to move up or to analyze, so you just put some new ones out on the board. Then it goes to player turn, starting with whoever came first out of the deck. So let's say it was the green player here. So on your player's turn, you have 2 actions that you must do, but then you have several optional actions that you can do, some of them only once per turn. Also, you can do any of these actions out of order. You just must do these 2 actions at some point and resolve them completely. So first thing you need to do is claim case lead. So you take one of your case lead cards, remember they're all the same, and you're going to place it down on top of one of the intel cards on one of the terrorist plots and organizations. Now, everyone's going to have to do this, and you kind of just want to choose which one has the best advantage for you think, or one you can actually make succeed. But you must do that. You must choose one of them each round. So eventually there's going to be a lot of different threats out on the board and a lot of people claiming multiple cards. The next thing you have to do is play 2 of your intel cards down onto threats that are on the board. One of those cards must be played on another player's case, whether you like it or not. You might choose to try and sabotage them with an action card, or play red cards against them or blue cards against them if you want their threat to succeed or fail to one side or the other. The other card that you play can be on any card that you want, including your own. It's just that you can't play them both to the same card. So you simply put them on top of the other intel cards that are already here. And, well, that was too many. But there you go. Let's say that this player had already claimed a card as well. So voila, that would be a legal move because I put a card under mine, but I also put one under another player's. Now, the optional actions you can do. I already mentioned discarding an intel card in order to get tokens. Each player also starts off with a soldier and an agent. The agents being the blue ones and the soldier being the little green guys. These give you, you can choose to recruit one of these. I'll get back to that in a second, but you can also choose to play these out if you want. When you choose to play them, you play all of them together to one case or not at all. So, and you can do both if you like to. So, if you choose to play the agents, you'll put those on a card, and then you get to pick up the plot card and look at it. At that point, you can say whatever you want about it, but only you get to actually see it. Also, those agents, while you no longer have them under your control, they're effectively gone and will eventually be discarded. They stay on the card most of the time until it gets all the way up to the imminent threat track. When it's at the imminent threat track and it's time to analyze it, those blue agents add +1 to the agency side. Different. The soldiers actually let you look at the stack of intel cards on one of the cards. Now, I'll mention this in my final thoughts, but my recommendation is that before you do that, when you place all your soldiers out there, you shuffle up the stack of intel cards before you look at them so you don't know who placed what card. Once you get done looking at the cards, you must take another random intel card and shuffle it into the stack without looking at it. So you get some intel, but it's risky because now you might have some misinformation. Now, the other main thing, optional thing that you can do on your turn is recruit someone. So you can recruit either a soldier or agent, which is very simple. You just take that from the stock, and you can only do 1 recruitment per turn. Also, you can also only discard once per turn as well, I should mention. Or you can choose to try and gain an asset card. Now, asset cards are characters that are going to help you. They have special abilities, but they're also going to be worth victory points. But in order to, while soldiers and agents are free, in order to recruit an asset, you have to spend 3 of your rep and or clout tokens. You decide which ones you have to spend, but you have to have at least 3 unless you have a character that gives you a discount on them. So let's go ahead and take a look at a few of these. And obviously, I'll start off with some of the main characters of the show. Here is Carrie Matheson, and Carrie Matheson's, let's take a look at the card here eventually. She gives you 3 victory points at the end of the game. She gives +1 blue to all your cases, so she's going to lean towards the agency on all of the cases that you have the case lead on. Also, when you deploy an agent to a threat, you may also look at all the intel cards of that threat. You have Saul Berenson. He's worth 2 victory points. When you recruit an asset, you also take an agent. When you deploy an agent, you draw an intel card. Here's Virgil. He's 2 victory points. He gives you +1 to your hand size. You normally have a hand size of 3, and you just draw back up to that. And you are not affected by exposure. Some of the follow cards make you expose every single one of your assets and also all the cards in your hand. William Walton, the Vice President, gives you 2 victory points, once per terrorist turn. You may discard a soldier to lower the impact of a threat by 1. He also has the drone strike capability. This is where you can spend a couple of your soldiers to actually nuke one of the threats on the board and get rid of it completely. And then here you have Nicholas Brody, the other main character of the show. He gives you 5 victory points, and you get to take a political clout on your turn. You can also burn him, which is remove him from the game in order to add +5 blue or +5 red, because he's kind of a double agent, spoiler, to one of the threats that you're right in the middle of analyzing if you think it's not going to go your way. But he has to be activated in order to do that. And when you take one of these asset cards, if you actually buy it, you actually get to draw 2, pick 1, you discard the other one, and it goes right off the bat, it's going to go face down in front of you, but you can choose to put them face up in order to activate it. If it's activated, though, it's possible that it's going to get burned or or stolen from you. In other words, it's vulnerable when it's activated. Once you get done with your turn, it's going to go to the next turn in clockwise order until everyone's taken a turn. Then you go all the way back to the beginning, draw a new card off the case lead stack, and then do it all over again. Now, on future subsequent terrorist turns, the threats that you already have on the board move up. And now, actually, the first thing you do is analyze imminent threats. But if there are none there yet, you don't have to worry about them until the next round. When the next round comes around, if you have something up in the imminent threat column, then you have to analyze it. And that's where this threat analysis board comes in. You don't have to use this, but it helps you keep track of things, I suppose. You're going to take the threat that's about to be analyzed, put it on the board, and here's the plot card for it. Flip the plot over, put the organization card there, see what the complexity is, and then start flipping over the stack of intel cards that you have on it. Let's just take these random stack of cards and see what happens. So flip them over one by one. You've got 3 for the red side. Actually, yeah, let's focus in on that a bit. There's 3 for red. 3 for red. It's not looking good. 3 for blue. 2 for red. Oh boy. 2 for blue. 1 for blue. 1 for red. So obviously this is overwhelmingly for the terrorists. That means that the fallout of the card happens. You look at the impact level, see how many terrorist tokens go out on that side of the board, and so on. And then you just eliminate the threat. It comes off the board, and then you move on to the next one if there are more imminent threats. All right, so that's essentially the game. I know that was kind of a quick, dirty run through, but if you're the loyal agent of the agency, you want to get as many of these rep tokens as possible and make sure that this track fills up with your agency tokens. If you are the political opportunist, you want to make sure this track fills up with tokens to end the game, but you want to have the most political clout. And oh, I almost forgot that part. That's the important part about the political opportunist. If the plot succeeds for the terrorists, then every player is going to get political clout tokens equal to the impact. So the political opportunist may sometimes want terrorist plots to succeed. I'll talk more about that in my final thoughts. But if you're the terrorist, you want to either have that entire track over there fill up. Ideally, that's what you want to happen because that means that you're going to automatically win the game. Or if it gets down to the blue track filling up, you want to not be accused by the other players, and you want to have the most get the most points by having that track fill up, and everyone wants to have as many points from their asset cards as possible. Got it? Good. Let's go to my final thoughts. All right, so I always start off talking about theme and components. Components are good. All the little bits and the pieces are high quality. I like the little miniatures. I like all the different tokens, and the graphic design looks attractive and easy to understand. It's a pet peeve of mine whenever a game based off of a show or a movie uses still frame photos of the show or movie in question. And I know that I shouldn't care about that because it makes total sense, right? First off, it's cheaper. You have those assets, no pun intended, to use, so why not use them? And also, it draws in people who are interested in the show. They're like, oh, look, it is just like the show that I like so much. There they are, right there. There's all the characters. So it makes total sense. It's just not attractive to me, and I want something more distinct. For instance, just as an example, I really bagged on the X-Files board game. It wasn't my cup of tea. I thought it needed a lot of work. But what I liked about it a lot was the way the game looked because they used artwork from the comic book X-Files, which makes sense because it was IDW who did the comic and also had a hand in producing the game. But even so, even though that was also just reused, it gave the game a much more distinct feel while at the same time unmistakably being the X-Files. So I know that's kind of a nitpicky thing, but I don't know. To me, I just don't like seeing photos on my board games. Just a pet peeve of mine, but maybe you don't care as much. As far as the rulebook, though, let's talk about that, because rulebook's kind of terrible. It's not that there's not all the vital information there that you need. It's just kind of a scavenger hunt to get it at first. Your first game is, if you're anything like us, it's going to be kind of a learning curve type situation. Although, obviously, as a reviewer, I often play my first game at the table, learning as we go, which is not the way you should do it. But even so, there were a lot of frustrating things, like, as an example, in the beginning of the book, they have a general overview of all the individual cards in the game, which is fine, except that then, after a lot of pages of that, it gets finally to the setup of the game, and then what the players can do on their turns, and I just feel like it's constantly going back to certain sections of the book, and there's vital information that should be in other sections in the setup or during what you can do on your turn that's all the way back in the beginning. It's just really weird and awkward, and they do the annoying thing where there's clearly flavor text in the rules, but they don't denote it as flavor text. It's not in italics. It's not off in a sidebar. It's right there in the text as you're trying to read and get to the important bits of information, kind of buried. So that's a frustrating thing too, another pet peeve of mine. And as far as the theme goes, it clearly feels like a trader game, and there's some very thematic elements to it in general. For instance, deploying your soldiers to try and get intel, deploying your agents to try and figure out what the plot of this terrorist group is, feels thematic to me. The most thematic thing probably has to do with the political opportunist agenda, which I'll get to in my when I start talking about the mechanics of the game. But for now, what I'd like to say is, as far as the theme goes, it's a really cool feeling because the political opportunist kind of has to, it says right in the rule book, is trying to gussy up support for his or her political career by sort of manipulating and using the terrorist agenda for their own gain. It's not that they want the terrorists to blow people up, but it is true that if the terrorists blow people up, they can get on the pulpit and say, we're being besieged by these terrorists, and look what they're doing, and are you safe? Are your children safe? Vote for me, and I'll make sure that you're safe. Blah, 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 blah. That's kind of what goes on, and I just think that that's kind of neat. I think that that's an interesting dynamic where, mechanically speaking, the political opportunist, when the terrorist track fills up a little bit and a lot of political clout tokens come out to all the players, they have to kind of restrain themselves from going, woohoo, woohoo, because it's putting them closer to victory. But then there's that balancing act, which I'll get to in a second. Well, let's just jump into the mechanics because, actually, no, let me cap that off by saying that while I think the game is very thematic, I think that people that like Homeland in particular and are drawn to this game almost explicitly for that reason might be disappointed, because while this feels in general like a game of espionage, there's not a lot connecting it to the show itself. Yeah, you have asset cards with all the different characters, but you never feel like you are the character Carrie, or you are the character Brody, or Saul, or anyone else, any other minor characters. Those are like the three main characters, at least in the seasons that I watched. You are not those characters. They're just cards that may or may not show up in the game, which I think will disappoint some people. I was a little bit bummed by that. I thought maybe each of us would be one of those characters, like what happened in the X-Files board game, but maybe that was the downfall of the X-Files board game. I don't know. Maybe it's better to have it be general, but just know that this could have been, it would always be an espionage game. They could have rethemed it as a lot of different shows or movies based on spies. It doesn't feel that Homeland-ish or Homeland-y. So, the mechanics. This game is kind of fascinating to me. If you're going into this expecting, oh, I love trader co-ops, I'm all about Shadows over Camelot and Battlestar Galactica and Dead of Winter, this is going to give me that feeling. Well, yeah, a little bit. But like I said in my intro, this is a pure competitive game. Now, who wins and how they win is drastically different. But at the end of it all, there's going to be one winner. You're either going to be the most loyal agent of the CIA, rising through the ranks and becoming the head of the CIA or something, or you're going to use the terrorists and the CIA, play them against each other, and become a master politician or rise to president. Sure, you're president now. Or you're a terrorist and you're going to kill the United States. Let's just say that. Let's just go to the extremes, okay? And you win the game. And that's that aspect of it. I don't know how you would react to that. To me, it was a little bit disappointing when I first read that and went through all the rules, because I'm thinking to myself, oh man, having a trader seems wasted in a competitive game, because you're all out for each other anyways, right? Isn't it better that there's a cohesive group that's trying to work together and then someone infiltrates that? Doesn't that seem like a better way to go about it? But if Homeland did go about that, Homeland the game went about that, why would I bother playing it? Why I have a lot of other trader cooperative games that already do what Homeland would have been trying to do, and why bother with this one? What makes it distinct and unique? Well, it's distinct and unique because it's competitive, and it actually works-ish. It's so interesting because let me put it this way. Our first game of this, I played this game 3 different times with 3 different groups of players, which is probably a bad thing. I think that the most mileage you're going to get out of this game is from playing with the same group, because there's kind of a learning curve as to how the game functions. It's not an overly complex game, but figuring out what you're supposed to do can be a little bit complex, and I'll explain. In our first game, we're all sort of timid about the rules and not really sure what to do, so we're kind of testing the waters, like, I'll put a case here. The advantage, if I get it, seems pretty good, so I'll put this here, and I think I have a good shot at completing this one, so I'll put a case here, and then we start putting our intel cards out. And the dynamic here is that you are forced to put an intel card under another player's case, unless you're the very first player at the very first turn. And then you can just put another card wherever you want. But we're coming at it from the odds of, well, I made it very clear in the beginning, guys, this is not a cooperative trader game. This is a competitive one. So you need to stop other players from winning, right? But if you come at it from that angle, where you're putting down terrorist cards and other players' cards, because you're like, well, I don't want you to get the advantage of that card. I don't want you to have that pop and get all this good tokens and stuff. So I'm just going to put this -1 here, and I'm just going to be concerned about letting my own succeed. If you go about doing that, you'll have a situation like what happened to us in our 5th round of play, when the entire imminent threat track was completely filled up. They all popped one after another for the terrorists, which immediately made our entire threat track fill up all in one round. And we sat there flabbergasted, like, how could this possibly have happened? And the terrorist revealed himself and was like, oh, I won? Cool. Because he didn't plan it that way. It just happened because we were trying to sabotage each other's cards, regardless of what our roles were. And then the intel cards that were randomly put down there, the ones that started there, the ones that were put there from when soldiers were deployed there, just were bad. And it was just overwhelmingly bad for us. And therefore, we immediately, because of our sort of pettiness and selfishness, 2 of us, or all 3 of us, immediately could not win. That was it. That was the end of that. And no, actually there were 5 of us in that game. So there were 4 of us that were just like totally dead in the water. And when we got to the second game, I played with a different group of players, and I warned them ahead of time, here's what could happen. So here's how we should probably go about this. If you're a loyal agent, you want to make sure as many cases as possible succeed for the agency. That's what you want to happen. If you're the political opportunist, like I talked about during the talk about the theme, you kind of just want to get as much political clout as possible and maybe help some people let their cases succeed and maybe not others. Maybe it's okay to let some terrorists go through and increase your political clout. And if you're the terrorist, your job is very simple. You just want to make as many of them fail as possible, but you don't want to get caught doing it. So when you go into it with that mindset, where it's not just trying to screw the other players, it's focusing on the tasks that are there and how you can manipulate them to your end, regardless of which player is attached to them, I think that's where you have to come at this game. And it's not something I've mastered yet, I'll tell you that. And I think that, but it's really, really interesting. And it's even more interesting in the fact that with each agenda card, everyone scores points differently. And the terrorist's best shot is to win outright, I think. Because if it gets to the point where the terrorists, or where the agency's track fills up, the terrorists could still win. But probably the clunkiest thing about this game, and I think it's not done very well, but it is still interesting, is the accusation, where every player has a chance to secretly accuse someone and simultaneously flip over. If even one person accuses the terrorist of being the terrorist, then the terrorist is just out, which sucks, but of course you shouldn't have let yourself get put in that position anyways. But the game has a point system where you either gain 6 or -3 points depending on how you accuse people, if you accuse the right person or the wrong person. So if you know that the game is tight, you might be like, well, I really think you're the terrorist, but if I'm wrong, I don't think I want to take -3 points. But someone who's really sure could get 6 points. So if you know you're going to lose anyways, why not try? I think that's interesting. I also think it's incredibly detrimental to the terrorist player who might have otherwise been playing a pretty good game but just didn't play good enough to win outright. So that's a weird thing, but it does lead to some interesting situations at the end. Like someone in the first game recommended, well, if we just want to guarantee that the terrorist doesn't win, why doesn't each of us just accuse the other person in line? And everyone else said, well, You could do that, sure, but I'm not taking negative 3 points guaranteed. So there's a lot of wheeling and dealing and back and forth and suspecting other players of doing something fishy, even if they're not the terrorists, just because they want to put themselves ahead. Speaking of individual components specifically, I like the whole asset card system. It's interesting that you can trade in 3 tokens, which for you might be very important. They might be how you're getting victory points, but you might be trading in for a victory point card that's worth 3, or it might be worth 5. But your asset cards are they are vulnerable. If they're active, they can be burned. And I think there's some things that can even burn inactive ones, or they could expose them and put them in danger. And there's some cards that'll let you steal other people's cards, like Brody's wife. I don't know how that works exactly, but you play Brody's wife, burn her, and then you get to take Brody. So there's things like that could happen. So it's a gamble, but their abilities are powerful, and I do enjoy that dynamic of it. I already mentioned I like the thematic aspect of putting out the soldiers and the agents and looking at the cards, but it's risky because you might be shuffling in. You might look at a card if you're a loyal agent and say, oh, there's a couple of blue cards there. I'm fine. There's a couple of blue 2s. I put my soldier there, see him, no problem. And then you shuffle in a red 5, and then you're totally screwed. But you don't know that. By the way, it wasn't clear in the rule book. I would recommend that every time a soldier comes out, you shuffle the cards first, because it seems unwieldy and it seems unfair for a soldier to be deployed to a card and immediately see every card that was played in order, because you can easily figure out who played what card at that point. I think they should be shuffled up every single time before they're seen, but that's just me. The agent thing is cool too, because you can look at the plot card and then you get a +1 blue towards that card when it gets up to the imminent threat level. But maybe you don't want that because you're the terrorist, but you want that information of what's on the plot card, and whether it's a global fallout or a regular fallout. If it's a global fallout, maybe you really want to make sure that that does not pop for the terrorists, or maybe you don't care. So there's a lot of interesting little bits and pieces in this game, things that work really, really well, things that are very clunky. Moving cards around constantly on the track, moving them up every round, the whole terrorist turn can feel very clunky, and resolving them, and it says moving everything over to the board to resolve them is really weird and kind of not necessary. But when you get over that clunkiness and get to the main aspect of the game, the whole backstabbing and trying to play as a political opportunist, playing one side against the other, and trying to, as a terrorist, trying not to be caught and trying to win outright and trying to make sure it doesn't get to an accusation. This whole aspect of the game is what's most fascinating to me. And I don't know that I would recommend this to everyone. I would certainly recommend that you try it first. And even if you're a huge fan of Homeland, especially try it first, because you might be disappointed how it's not linked all that well to the show. But for people that like trader co-op games, and they are just sort of, they want something different, they want something new and fresh, give this one a look. I'm not saying it's on the level of games like Dead of Winter or Battlestar, but it's certainly an interesting spin on that. It's a game that you can get people, and this happened in a couple of our games, people who would not want to play even a semi-cooperative game because they don't like cooperative games at all, found out that this was competitive, and they were like, okay, I'll give that one a shot. So that's an interesting angle that you can come at this one from if you're having problems getting it to the table. Homeland the game. It's very interesting. I don't know if it's great, but it's definitely good, and it's definitely one that I want to play more because I think there's more to explore there.
Thanks for watching. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Patreon, and make sure to check out our sponsor, Board Game Bliss, where you can find an amazing selection of games from around the world. BoardGameBliss.com. Thanks for your support.